I can't wait, because mine and Carmen Carrion's new book, Freaky Folklore, Terrifying Tales of the World's Most Elusive Monsters and Enigmatic Cryptids, is coming July 16th, featuring the history and lore of terrifying folklore creatures from across the globe, alongside some cool and creepy illustrations. Pre-order today on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite bookstore, or go to eeriecast.com/freak. The next 1,000 verified pre-orders will get a Freaky Folklore decal and a 3-month subscription code to EerieCast Plus, and all entrants will get a free PDF sneak peek of the Freaky Folklore book. To verify and for more info, go to eeriecast.com/freak. The following is 3 half-sized episodes put together. By themselves, they didn't perform well, so here they are again in one big enjoyable episode. There will be night drive stories, giant monsters, and working at night terrors. These scary and allegedly true stories will make sleep a thing of the past. If you have a creepy story of the unexplained, I want to narrate it on this show. Send it to me at darkstories.org. I recommend listening to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Link in the description, or just go to eeriecast.com. Now, let's begin. The Haunted Car on Campus, from Silver Bullet 54. Before I start, many students have seen this, so they can corroborate my encounter. In 2009, I was helping a friend of mine move into the Penn State Hazleton campus in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. As we were moving in, she asked, "Did you see that car last night?" I told her that I hadn't, and asked where that random question came from. She said that she saw it, but something was weird, because no one was driving it. I asked if she meant it was a self-driving car, but she said it was an 80s model. However, she wasn't sure the make or model. I talked to a few juniors there who said they had seen the same thing. A car randomly traveling around the campus in the dead of night, but no one had ever seen anyone in the driver's seat. This whole story seemed bizarre, and I thought it was just a prank, even though all the students assured me it was very true. I really wasn't sure what to make of it at that point. Turns out everyone knew about it. Professors, incoming freshmen, alumni, even the local police department could all document sightings or stories about this supposed haunted car. There were even stories and books and creepypastas written about it. I figured that not everyone could be wrong or lying, so I recruited a few other friends for a stakeout to see just what was going on. A few nights later, we parked at a Turkey Hill across the road from the campus and watched. At 11 p.m., we saw a car with its lights on, going around the building at a snail's pace. A few minutes later, it showed up again. My friends and I were all actually shivering because of how creepy this was. I had never heard of a haunted vehicle before this. As we watched, the lights dimmed, then went up to the high beams, and there was no one in the front seats. We all screamed and tore out of there. I talked to my friend who lived in the dorms the next day. She said 6 other students that very same night had the same sighting as us. The high beams, the empty seats, the haunted car, everything. Now, to this day I wonder, why is it haunting a college? Why did the car move with no one controlling it? And can machines have souls? What does it all mean? I don't have an answer to any of this. The whole case is interesting, but freaky. The Weeping Woman, from Millie. This happened to me in 2022 when I was coming back from my office one day. It was July and the rain was pouring heavily. It was 9 p.m. at the moment, and I left my office, sat in my car, and started the drive home. The short way to my office goes through a patch of woods, which always gave me the creeps at night. And to add to my unease, it was raining so heavily that I could barely see 3 feet in front of my car. Due to this, I had to move very slowly to avoid bumping into trees. As I was driving through the uneven road, I heard a sound, like someone, specifically a woman, was weeping loudly. I'm saying loudly because all my car windows were shut, but even so, I could hear her weeping above the rains pattering. The hair on the back of my head stood up. I tried to find the source of the voice, but I couldn't find it. But as I continued to drive, I saw it. A figure amidst the mist and rain. I couldn't make out a lot of details, but it was certainly a woman. I could see her hair touching her shoulders and a feminine form. She sat on the road, just crying and crying. I couldn't help myself. I rolled down my car window, and I called out to her. Oh, I wish I hadn't. As soon as I spoke, she held her head up, and I swear she didn't have eyes or even a nose. Just a mouth and a smile so wide, it made me nearly soil myself. She grinned at me. Immediately, I rolled my car window back up, but in that brief amount of time, she had rushed to the side window of my car and began to knock at it. My eyes burned with tears. I had never been so scared. My body froze up when I saw a rock in her hand as she was about to break the glass. Something inside me yelled to floor it, so I did. As I started to drive, I swear I heard her wailing and shouting at me to come back. But I never even looked back. I made it home safe, and ever since then, I never took the short way through the woods again. Just beware who you decide to call out to in the middle of the night. Hellhounds, from Gin 5445. Late one night, a friend of mine and myself were out driving around, searching for creepy places, trying to scare each other and ourselves. We did this quite often. She was driving a brand new car and we were both smokers at the time. Not wanting to smoke in the car, we had pulled over on the side of the road. We were out in the country, so there were no streetlights, and houses were few and very far between. At the moment, we both had to pee as well, so she stood at the front of the car and I at the back. Afterwards, we took our time smoking cigarettes, before eventually getting back into the car. No sooner had we shut the doors, there were at least half a dozen large black dogs surrounding the car. They were barking at us and snarling, looking in through the windows, and when the lights from inside hit their eyes, they shone red. These dogs were big enough to not have to stand on hind legs to peer inside the car. We were terrified. My friend tried to start the car, but the engine was not rolling over. And what's crazy was that this was a brand new car. There was no reason whatsoever why it shouldn't have started. We were extremely scared, now panicking. She tried several times more to start the car, and the whole while the dogs barked and growled and circled us. At one point, we both frantically looked down at the ignition, as if we were both checking to make sure everything looked right, and by the time we both looked back up, peering out the windows, the dogs were gone. We looked all around us, searching for them, but they were just gone. And the very next time she tried to start the car, it started like it was nothing, running with absolutely no problems. You better believe we got the heck out of there as fast as we could. It's not the only creepy thing we've ever come across, but definitely the experience that stands out as being the most horrifying. We'd gone out looking for something that night, and boy did we find it. Be careful what you go looking for, because it may find you. Never drive tired. From Jack A. It was a dark and moonless night, and the only sound that could be heard at the time was the hum of my semi-truck engine. I have a heavy truck, and it wasn't easy to roll, but as it barreled down the deserted highway, I'd been driving for hours. I was starting to feel the fatigue set in. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes, but it was too late. The truck collided with the figure, sending it flying into the darkness. Shaken, but unhurt, I got out of the truck to inspect the damage and to check on this figure. But as I approached the spot where the figure had landed, I realized it was no ordinary person. Its limbs were twisted and contorted in unnatural ways, and its eyes glowed with an eerie yellow light. Before I could react, it let out a blood-curdling howl, and I knew I was in trouble. I raced and jumped back into the truck, slamming the door shut. But whatever that thing was, it wasn't injured enough, and was insanely fast. It leapt onto the hood of the truck, clawing at the windshield, trying to break through. I hit the gas, but as I said before, the vehicle was heavy, so it was slow to move. I was going 50, and the thing clung on, its claws digging deep into the metal. For the next few miles, the truck roared down the highway, this thing clinging to the hood. I was terrified that it would break in, but I knew I had to keep driving. Eventually, it jumped off, and I felt relieved until I looked over, and that creature was keeping up with me. I had to be going at least 70 by then, but this thing just didn't stop. Then, with a quick glance in my rear view, I noticed the trailer was gone. I saw it in the distance with a gaping hole in it. Did that thing do that? How was that physically possible? After what seemed like forever, the thing let out a final guttural scream and ran off into the night. I never forgot that experience, and I avoided that highway for as long as I could. I was lucky to escape. St. Ketta's. From Sky 3399. 11 p.m. one night, my cousin, her boyfriend, and I were out driving around exploring places. Our first stop was a little forest that overlooked a lake. It wasn't terribly exciting, so we left before long. My cousin, Abby, had an idea to go somewhere haunted, so we all got back in the car and started to drive. My cousin mentions an abandoned place called St. Ketta's. Back in the 30s, St. Ketta's was an institution for the mentally ill and disabled. She begins to tell a story of what happened the last time she went to St. Ketta's with a friend. We'll call her friend Ali. She began, "It wasn't late at night, maybe around 11:30 p.m., when me and Ali drove up there. I heard a noise, so I stopped the car, and when I stopped, everything went quiet. All of a sudden, this black misty cloud began to form in front of the car, and we heard an inhuman noise. We started to drive away, and I heard church bells. I looked at Ali and asked if she heard them too. She looked at me confused and said, 'Abby, there are no churches around here.' After my cousin finished the story, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. We drove for 20 minutes until we arrived. As we drove past, we noticed a cemetery next to the place. I had the same uneasy feeling, but we didn't see anything out of the ordinary. My cousin suggested we try driving past again, since nothing happened the first time. So she turned around, and we did just that. The second we began to drive away, her boyfriend shouted, 'Did you see that? I just saw something outside the car.' But no one else saw it. We drove for 5 minutes before my cousin stopped the car and sat there silently. Her boyfriend, we'll call him Charles, looked at her and asked, "Babe, what's wrong? Why did you stop?" My cousin was unresponsive. Charles spoke again. "Babe?" I then asked myself, concerned, "Abby, are you okay?" My cousin turned her head in an unnatural way and said in this creepy, disoriented voice, "Everything is fine. I'm okay." She then started to giggle for a good minute straight. This was quite unsettling. Charles turned around, looked at me, and mouthed, "What the heck? Is she okay?" Then my cousin said again, "Everything is fine," and giggled even more. I felt goosebumps sprouting up all over me. It was then that I heard a deep male breathing sound coming from the back of the car. I looked in the back but didn't see anything. I turned back around and my cousin was making these unnatural body movements now. She stopped the car again, this time leaning forward into the steering wheel. Charles asked, "Why are we stopping again? What's going on?" My cousin was unresponsive. She began driving again, but remained in the weird position she sat in. I exchanged another freaked out look with Charles. Then Abby started to laugh, saying, "Everything is too bright. It hurts my eyes." But nothing around us was bright. It was dark out, and there were no other cars in sight. We finally got back to town, and like a light switch being flipped, Abby perked up again, turning back to normal in an instant as if nothing had happened. Charles even asked, "Are you good now?" Abby looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" "You were acting like you were possessed for 15 minutes, Charles explained. I added, "Dude, you really were acting creepy. I've never seen you act like that before. It was like something was controlling you." We got back to my cousin's place, and I asked her if she even remembered what happened. She told me that for a good 15 to 20 minutes, she felt as if she wasn't there, like she was fading in and out. I promise you, my cousin was completely sober, but something just wasn't right. It really was like something was possessing her ever since we drove past St. Ketta's the second time, until we got back to town. I think we may have provoked something. I will never be going back to St. Ketta's again. Suffolk Time Slip from Alec Mack. I had recently heard about the story of 3 boys who experienced a time slip in Suffolk, UK, and of another around the same Norfolk area. It inspired me to share mine and my family's experience. It was around 2010 to 2013. I was 8 to 10 years old. My brother and I had been playing badminton with our mom at a country club in a nearby town. We were driving back home at about 10 to 11 p.m. near the Charlesfield area. Having lived in Hertfordshire for a few years, I was familiar with the route home and recognized most of the corners on the country road. We had just taken a left turn off the main road, and I remember seeing the speed limit signs I was used to. It was late and we weren't speaking much in the car, but about 10 to 15 minutes had passed, and I suddenly made eye contact with those same exact signs I had seen a while ago. The route itself was country roads, but there weren't very many turns, and to drive in a loop would have required an extremely long and unusual detour, not one my mother was likely to make, since she drove this route many times before. For her to have ended up back at the same exact spot, she would have had to veer off the known path, which we didn't do as it was a pretty straight line to our home. I immediately pointed this out. that somehow we were back in the exact place we were at 15 minutes before. My brother and mother immediately exchanged similar looks of confusion and discomfort, knowing full well we were somehow in the exact same location again. I checked the clock on the dashboard, and sure enough, it displayed the exact time from 15 minutes prior. The remainder of the drive home was uneventful, and we kind of just slept it off. We still talk about the experience from time to time. I thought I'd share this odd time-slip story from my family. Suffolk has a wide range of mysteries like the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, so I guess it was time there was another strange tale. Phantom Truck at the Haunted Cemetery. From Mick Figerson. About 3 years ago, when I first started dating my girlfriend, she went on a trip down to Aruba for a week, and since I didn't have a car at the time, she allowed me to use hers for the duration of the trip. One night I was chilling with a friend. We were enjoying a few beers and playing some video games. It was getting late, so I decided to head home before becoming too impaired to drive, as we had done a bit of smoking too. As I drove, I was thinking about this earlier conversation I had with my friend about how one of the old local cemeteries was haunted, and that we used to try to investigate it as teenagers. At the time of writing this, I'm 25. Anyway, I decided to take a trip up there myself, as it was only a 5-minute detour from my main route home. I made it to the cemetery, and I sat there for a moment. I then got out, proceeding to go through the small wooden gate that borders the grounds. As I walked around, I heard strange noises in the tree line, leaves being brushed as if something was walking through them. I brushed it off as deer, because they roam around like crazy in these parts. Another 10 to 15 minutes go by, and I decide to leave. I didn't want to chance the police driving by, seeing my girlfriend's car sitting parallel to the gate. The following night, I was hanging with the same friend again. We were doing the same thing as the night before, playing a few rounds back and forth from Fight Night and UFC. Once it got late, I left as usual. Taking the same route, I decided to go back to the cemetery, as my curiosity got the better of me. The turn to the street that the cemetery sits on is a dark, slight hill. Going through that way, the only light is your car's headlights. So I drove up the hill towards the bend, right before the fence of the cemetery begins, when, out of nowhere, a large truck with headlights brighter than most LED lights illuminates my entire car. This truck was right up on me almost instantly, and you can very easily tell a vehicle will be turning on that street because you would see lights shine on the trees at about 100 yards out. But no, this truck just appeared. I put my foot to the floor, driving my girlfriend's cobalt like a bat out of heck, and this truck stayed right on my bumper the entire time. For the short distance we drove, this truck was right on me, and I felt completely terrified. I came up to another bend when I hit that turn faster than ever. I noticed then the truck was no longer behind me. It had chased me the entire length of the cemetery before finally disappearing. There were no other lights beside my headlights then, and it was silent after the chase. I didn't return to that cemetery for quite some time. I went back recently as I'd gotten bored getting off the night shift after work. I go up there these days every now and then, during storms or during eclipses, maybe even foggy nights, to see if any of that increases my chances of sighting anything remotely close to what I experienced that night. To this day, I truly believe what chased me was a phantom truck, something that guards the grounds of the cemetery. I really don't think it was a person trying to mess with me, considering how quickly it appeared and vanished without noise and with nowhere to turn around. When I tell this story to friends, I always get a chill down my back, and I feel uneasy. I don't care if people believe me or not, but I do hope no one else has to experience it. From Above, from Everett. It was late October. My girlfriend Hannah had begged me to come over to keep her company while her parents were out for the evening. I happily obliged with plans to be back before my own parents' 11 p.m. curfew. It was a fun night. We roasted hot dogs over the fire pit behind her house, then carved silly little faces into a couple of small pumpkins as the night wound down. I tossed the slimy guts dramatically towards Hannah at some point, making her squeal. After hosing pumpkin remnants off the porch, I gave Hannah a lingering kiss goodbye around 10:30 p.m. and headed to my dusty Civic. I cranked up a country song about ghosts on the radio as I drove slowly down the winding 2-lane road out of Hannah's subdivision, high grass brushing both shoulders. Oaks, cedars, and cottonwoods crowded thick on either side, leaves drifting lazily down in the crisp autumn air that rushed through my cracked windows. I absent-mindedly drummed along on the steering wheel to the chorus when a sudden explosive bang and crunch made me scream in shock. Before I even had time to react, my windshield had spiderwebbed violently right above where the steering wheel and dash met. Cold night air instantly invaded the cab as I instinctively slammed both feet on the brakes, sending the car into a skidding stop halfway off the narrow pavement. "What in the world?" I choked out, my pulse pounding against my ribs. As the dust swirled back down in the headlights, I gawked wordlessly at the long furry legs and foam-flecked nostrils now visible, smashed grotesquely against my dash. Half of a 6-point rack protruded obscenely through the mangled windshield alongside the deer's limp head. I jerked back against the headrest, mouth hanging open as I fought to process how an entire freaking buck could possibly have crashed straight down onto my speeding Civic. Hands shaking badly from adrenaline, I carefully opened the door and stepped into piled autumn leaves on the side of the road. Moonlight filtering down through the dense trees glinted dully off the poor creature's remaining antlered tines, its flaccid tongue poking from its peeled-back lips. Dark blood, nearly black in the shadows, oozed steadily over the fractured glass, ruining my dashboard. As the initial shock faded, I swept my stunned gaze skyward, desperately trying to figure out how this bizarre disaster could have happened on an empty country route. I could have sworn it had come from above, not from the left or right, like a deer crossing the road would have. I went to my glove box and pulled out a flashlight I kept in there. Then I looked at the branches above. A few moments later, I spotted something about 50 feet away from my car. I pointed the flashlight at it. There was no mistaking it. An oak limb thick as my thigh dangled out over the asphalt, high above the road, and still swaying from it was the missing half of the buck's rack. Somehow this fully grown buck had ended up entangled up in an oak tree nearly 5 stories tall before breaking its antlers and hurtling violently down without warning onto my passing car below. And I knew that deer did not get up there by itself. Every hair prickled on my arms and neck with the realization. But, morbidly curious, I traced the tree the antlers hung from with my flashlight, wondering if I could find more clues. Country music continued to crackle softly from my busted speakers. There was no way I was going to chalk this up to some elaborate Halloween prank. Even so, I was at a loss for an explanation as to how this even happened. Shaken to my core and giving up, I powered off the flashlight with a shudder and quickly returned to my car. With quite a bit of struggle, I managed to get the deer off my car, and praying it still drove okay, I got behind the steering wheel and drove cautiously back home. I would have to explain this mess to my parents. They didn't believe that a deer had fallen from a tree, but they did believe that a deer had jumped in front of my car and I managed to hit it. So they blamed me for driving too fast, too unsafe, and I was grounded. I later called Hannah about the story. She believed me and was even marveled by the idea of a deer falling from a tree. Now, I've driven past that same rural route dozens of times over the past couple of years, but I've yet to glimpse anything like it again. Hannah loves having me retell the story at bonfires, and though it's all fun to her, the memory still sends chills down my spine. Because what put that buck in the tree? What is strong enough to hang a fully grown buck weighing 200 to 300 pounds from a branch 5 stories high? I think I'd rather not know the answer. But even now, whenever I drive, day or night, I catch myself scanning the treetops whenever the trees on the road I'm driving happen to reach a little too far over the road. Cub Scout Recollection from Meter Maid 24. This is a memory I try to keep pushed down. It's not something I like to think about because it's unsettling and confusing, but it is very real. It was 2011. I was very psyched that weekend for a campout. I had joined the Cub Scouts that year, and this would be my first time camping with the troop. Mom got me a brand new sleeping bag, and Dad bought me a cool new flashlight that strapped to my head. I spent weeks before the trip, planning what snacks and other things to bring, imagining all the fun I would have with my new friends. When Friday finally rolled around, I was bursting with excitement. Mom drove me to the meeting spot and helped me haul my overstuffed backpack to the gathering area. I gave her a quick hug goodbye before running off to join my den. We all were cracking up, laughing, and joking around while the scout leaders did one final backpack check to make sure we had the essentials. After what felt like ages, the scoutmasters rounded all of us up, leading us to the buses that would be taking us into the mountains to the camp. I plopped down next to my best friend Simon. We played card games to pass the time during the bumpy bus ride. We were both new to scouting that year and had hit it off right away with our shared obsession of crawling through the massive drainage pipes around our neighborhood. After an hour or so, the buses lumbered up the narrow, winding driveway of the lakeside camp. Simon and I pressed our faces against the grimy windows, oohing and awing over the thick forests and wild hills surrounding the camp. The buses squealed to a stop, and we bounced out, heading straight to the campsites, where we'd be picking spots and setting up tents. Simon and I scored a prime area right next to the main trail, which led to the latrines, close enough to the counselor tents that we hopefully wouldn't get in trouble for some late-night giggling. We helped each other assemble our simple A-frame tents, struggling a bit to get the flexible poles correctly seated. With our camp fully set up, the real fun could start. We did our first activity rotation that evening, which was archery. After that was rowboating and climbing the towering rock wall. Well, Sam climbed the wall. I belayed him from below, too nervous to go past the halfway point. By the time we got back, the sun was setting, and the scout leaders were getting the bonfire ready. We gobbled down the delicious hearty stew the camp cooks had prepared, then ran around the field, burning off some steam before the fire. The flames were really roaring when the scouts finally gathered in a ring around the burning logs. I'll always remember how mystical that scene was. Shadows dancing against the dark woods behind us. Millions of stars twinkling overhead in the mountain sky. One of the scoutmasters officially kicked off the campfire by going over safety rules, but I could barely focus. I just wanted those scary stories to start. After the typical songs and skits, The camp counselor leading the event invited anyone to share local legends or ghost stories about the area. A bunch of the older scouts told some creepy tales about haunted cabins, bloody battlefields, campers being watched from the woods at night. I knew they were just stories, but I found myself getting freaked out anyway. Eventually, Calvin, one of the older scoutmasters, ambled up with a mischievous sparkle in his eye. I figured he was just going to tell some story to try and get a scare out of us kids, but what he said always stuck with me. Calvin warned us that the camp got its fair share of strange, unexplained events from deep in the forest. He described hearing horrible booming crashes in the middle of the night, even on totally clear evenings. The thunderous sound echoed off the mountaintops, making it impossible for Calvin to track down the source. He swore it was too rhythmic and extended to be collapsing trees or rocks, almost like giant heavy footsteps pounding down from the peaks above. Most of us scouts laughed it off, making jokes about Calvin trying to scare us. But something about the intense look on his face as he told the story made me feel ice cold, even next to the towering bonfire. Another scout leader quickly lightened the mood with a funny skit, but I still felt jittery and on edge when Simon and I eventually headed to our tents. I wriggled into my cozy new sleeping bag, but I couldn't relax. Even with Simon's gossiping whispers distracting me from the scary story, I felt super aware of each little night noise around us. The wind hissing through branches, raindrops pattering on the tent, owls calling in the dark, all put me more and more on edge. Exhausted from the full day of activities, I must have drifted off eventually. Sometime deep in the night, I startled awake for no clear reason. I groggily wondered if I had dreamed something disturbing and was about to sink back to sleep when an earth-shaking boom roared in the distance. I shot upright, heart racing as my mind struggled to place the horrible crashing sound. Had a tree fallen right next to our tents? My heart was hammering as I fumbled to turn on my flashlight. The narrow beam pierced through the darkness of my tent. I scanned the cramped space quickly, then peered outside. No fallen trees, no rubble in sight. "What's happening?" Simon mumbled from his tent, voice slurred with sleep. Another earth-rumbling boom echoed from somewhere out in the woods, seemingly even closer this time. The plastic tent walls rippled with the force of it. "I don't know, man," I whispered back. "Remember that story Calvin told about the weird booming noises out here? Do you think—" I trailed off. I crawled back into my tent, feeling goosebumps rise on my arms that had nothing to do with the cold night air leaking through the cheap tent. Simon and I lay frozen in our spots for a moment, listening intently past the usual forest sounds. The silence stretched on, and I started to wonder if I'd imagined the bellowing crashes when an ear-splitting crack cut through the quiet. I swear I could almost feel the vibrations through the hard ground beneath me that time. "We should check on the others, make sure everyone's okay," Simon suggested, his voice higher pitched than usual. I really didn't want to go out into that unnatural darkness just yet, but curiosity yanked at me. We finally motivated ourselves enough to scramble out of our cozy sleeping bags, gingerly stepping out of the tent flaps. Most of the other scouts were still snoozing peacefully in their little tents, but we spotted a small group of kids standing in a tense huddle near the counselor tents. As we hurried over, strained whispers reached my ears. "Don't know what's going on. Could just be rock slides further in the valley echoing. The last one was way closer, bro. What if it's that monster Calvin was—" I awkwardly joined the ring of wide-eyed scouts. A few claimed to have heard the night's first deafening crack from within their tents. Others were awakened only by the second closer boom. Either way, none of us had a clue about the origin of those sanity-questioning sounds. After some time of frenzied speculation, the noises faded out for good. The counselors eventually convinced everyone to go back to bed, using logical explanations about loose rock falls. But their calming words still couldn't fully drown out Calvin's chilling campfire story, which rang in our heads. I lay awake long after Simon's muffled snores filled the air once more. Those rhythmic, almost footstep-sounding noises reverberated through my memory on repeat. As much as I tried to convince myself of the rock slide explanation, like the Scoutmasters, some deep gut instinct kept me on edge. The next day, all the scouts buzzed about the odd midnight disturbances over breakfast, comparing stories and theories. But outdoor time waits for no one. Soon we were all distracted, splashing down the frigid lake during the polar bear swimming, or focused owning our slingshot skills. By nightfall, though, creepy theories came creeping back as shadows stretched over our camp. That evening's activities ended after dinner, with 2 hours of free roam before lights out. We could hang out at the dining tables or tents if we wanted, but Simon, another friend named Tyler, and I had an even better idea: a secret mission into the shadowy forest trails. During the day, older scouts like us were allowed to wander the winding dirt hiking paths if we stayed in earshot. We figured under cover of darkness, we might spot clues as to the previous night's ruckus, or at least have some fun, spooking each other while searching for that mythical forest monster. Tyler ran off to grab flashlights for him and Simon, while Simon and I stuffed our pockets with snacks. I made sure my handy head-mounted flashlight was in working order. We then met up just inside the tree line, trying and failing to seem casual about breaking the rules. My heart sped up with nerves and excitement as we left the last pull of light from the counselor's pit. Our beams bounced erratically off trunks and shrubs as we pushed further down the narrow path. I heard Simon gulp loudly next to me when an owl pierced the night with its eerie hooting. Stray branches scratched faintly against our jackets, making us all twitch with building apprehension. "You really think those booms could have been the monster Calvin told us about?" Tyler suddenly whispered. He swung his flashlight manically from side to side as we walked, as if he feared something was about to leap from the brush. "I mean, he seemed totally serious when he talked about it," I murmured back after a few silent seconds. And the timing was weird. Tyler gulped again, but kept scanning the close forest with jerky movements. I was about to reach out to him to help him settle down when he abruptly stiffened. Guys, are you feeling kind of sick too?" Tyler asked, with a definite quiver in his voice. He wrapped an arm across his stomach and hunched forward. "Sick?" Simon questioned at the same moment I blurted out, "What's wrong?" "I don't know, man. My stomach just suddenly feels messed up, and I'm getting all sweaty." Tyler continued stumbling forward, but his pasty, grimacing face honestly concerned me. Simon pressed a steadying hand to our friend's shoulder. "Hey, no worries, buddy. David can keep going and say hi to that monster for us if he wants. But let's me and you head back to the counselors and get you checked out." I felt torn watching Tyler struggle to nod in agreement. I didn't want to abandon what was supposed to be an intrepid trio adventure, but Tyler clearly wasn't up for pressing onward into the eerie night. A feeling of curiosity and exploration got the better of me. "Yeah, I'll keep going for a bit if that's all right. I hope you feel better, dude," I offered supportively. Tyler attempted a pained smile over his shoulder before Simon led him carefully back up the trail. And, just like that, I stood alone as their shuffling footsteps faded away. icy doubt trickled down my neck for the first time that night. The surrounding woods seemed even more silent, more ominous, without my friend's company. I couldn't even hear distant camp chatter anymore, above the rustling leaves. Still, I reminded myself I was not that deep into the woods yet. No point turning back from my first solo night hike over random creeks and hoots. Adjusting my jacket tighter against the chill breeze, I repositioned my head-mounted flashlight and continued down the narrow dirt trail. Crunching leaves and snapping twigs marked my cautious steps into denser forest. The path remained fairly level with some exposed roots to step over carefully. I used my flashlight more judiciously now that I was solo, trying my best to preserve battery, reducing my chances of spooking wildlife. Still, I paused periodically to sweep my dimming beam across the impenetrable woods around me. During one sweeping scan, I caught a flicker of movement off to my left. My heart was suddenly thunderous. I backtracked my light along a row of tangled bushes. I could make out a pale column rising up from behind the shrubbery, so smooth it almost glowed in the darkness. My breath caught when I realized my light filtered straight through the shape in places, almost like Swiss cheese holes. Hardly daring to breathe, I crept off the trail toward the odd formation, barely visible through the bushes. It must be a decaying birch tree, I told myself, firmly battling against icy unease. Still, I had never spotted white bark textured quite like that before. Just as I craned my neck to direct my fading beam at this holy trunk, an earth-shattering crash exploded behind me. I spun in sheer terror, fumbling to not fall over. Had a nearby tree just split and crashed down impossibly close? My weak light finally steadied on the trail I'd left moments before, but instead of a shattered maple or oak now blocking the path, I saw another pale pillar had now risen up in the middle of the dirt trail. How was that possible? I wondered. My heart seizing, I gaped upwards as the smooth column lifted off the ground, rising further and further. I turned to run, now facing that first object I saw, which I thought was a decaying birch tree, only to see it disappear above me, rising off the ground in much the same way. I ran off to the side, ducking behind a mossy boulder twice my size, clinging desperately as my mind reeled. Those column-like things, they had moved, rising up like freakish legs. Then, another soul-shaking thud pounded through the darkness, followed by an earth-quaking crash, even heavier than the previous two. This time, I turned my flashlight upward in stunned realization. The rhythmic sequence lined up perfectly with Calvin's description of booming footsteps and crashing echoes. But that would mean... My heart stuttered to comprehend the pale legs must belong to some towering creature, shrouded in night and forest canopy. I mindlessly sat there, trembling behind my protective rock, hearing the colossal footsteps fade steadily into the mountains. No other noise disturbed the deathly silence that night, except my ragged breathing. No scouts came searching for me when I didn't return from the bathroom trip we had used as our hiking excuse. For 2 hours, pure primal fear pinned me in place, until another scout's distant voice finally echoed down the trail, signaling that free roam had ended. On autopilot, I stumbled those shadowy couple of miles back to camp. I was reprimanded for coming back late, for hiking out too far. That night I hardly slept, between paralyzing waves of confusion and wonder at what I'd watched walking through those woods. Over a decade later, I still shudder remembering that pale towering leg lifting from forest shadows. Whatever had wandered down from untamed wilderness so close to our little scout camp defied all rational understanding. Whenever these scoutmasters organized return trips to the camp, I always refused to go back, making up various excuses, wary of what those dark mountain forests conceal. But I'm also quite tempted by the question that has haunted me all these years. What would happen if I returned to those haunted trails with proper gear? Could I finally get a glimpse of the rest of that huge wandering thing hidden in the darkness and canopy? The first time. From Red Scarecrow 99. I've been lucky enough to have witnessed a great many things in the woods, lakes, and mountains of the Poconos. I've spent my entire life out here, and the fairer weather usually has me itching to go fishing with my stepdaughter, or taking my dog on a hike, maybe even putting my kayak on the lake for some sketchy bass fishing before a thunderstorm. Many people try to get 5 more minutes in bed. I'm trying to get 1 more cast in. That being said, it wasn't like that when I was a kid. Hunting was more than a pastime in my family. I grew up with very little money, so hunting was a way to fill the freezer, even if you did have to freeze and be bored doing it. My father and I had just parked his S10 at our friend's house in Goldsboro. I was around 12 years old back then. This was my first year carrying a rifle myself. I was excited, but not enough to prevent me from sleeping at 4 a.m. on the ride there. So exactly where we went, I'm not sure. Our buddy had just moved there, and his trailer was situated on the edge of a private forest, which his landlord gave us all permission to hunt on. They, the adults, were psyched. I just wanted to read my Harry Potter book already. We walked for what felt like forever. I'm not sure how long it was, but I was in a hurry to sit down, eat my Pop-Tarts, and read. So my father placed me in a section of open pine forest. It was heavily wooded there, but had ample clearings for taking good shots. My dad was the kind of guy who, when he put you somewhere to stand, you'd better stay there. It was barely dawn when he disappeared into the fog that had begun to roll in. I had decided to make the best of it. I cleared brush away to be as quiet as possible while sitting, and got my breakfast ready. I was enjoying this fine cuisine of powder-made hot chocolate and strawberry Pop-Tarts. I had just finished a chapter in my book when I finished my food. The fog had fully rolled in now, and a light breeze had picked up. I only remember this because of the following events. I was reading the second book, The Chamber of Secrets. It felt like I was there for days under that tree, and I decided to hunt by sound, code for closing my eyes and taking a nap, in case my dad caught me. And that's when everything really started. It started off soft, leaves being kicked up, or at least the sound of leaves. My eyes flew open and adrenaline hit me. I was 12 years old. The images of Bambi's dad flooded my mind. I was pumped. Branches and twigs began to snap in the distance. But it was so foggy, I couldn't see past 40 yards. The noises died down ahead of me and out of sight. I cursed under my breath. The breeze must have carried my scent because the sounds were going around me. I quietly stood up, grabbing my rifle, ready to use it. I knew something was close, and it had to come into view sooner or later. My dad would crap his pants if I got the biggest buck of the year. But the woods were quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing now. I would later learn in life that that is not a good sign. At the moment, I was elated because I could hear better than I could see, and this gave me an advantage. Or so I thought. The steps were walking in a wide arc around me now. I had guessed that Bambi smelled my Pop-Tarts and was trying to find them. The noises of movement, brush moving and twigs snapping, ended in front of me where they began. I was impatiently waiting for my first trophy buck when I saw the outline of a man walking through the fog. I thought my dad had come to get me, and just couldn't see through the fog and had gotten turned around. I was happy, yet mad at the same time, as I lost sight of him and began to pack up. But he reappeared moments later, peering out from behind a tree. He reached up to steady himself on an overhead branch as he looked at me. Then my senses caught up to me. If that was my dad, why wasn't he wearing orange? Where was his rifle? And why was he so dark? Panic set in. I loved to read, and I loved the 000 section at the library. Stories of Bigfoot began to flood my mind. As hysteria set in, I let out a blood-curdling scream as a hand came down on my shoulder. It was my father, who now looked as surprised as me. I quickly told him about the man in the fog and how he had watched me and kept walking around me. If Fudge Around and Find Out were a person, that was my dad. At the prospect of some man watching me in the woods, he went right to the tree where I'd last seen him. He had his .30-06 trained on the tree. My dad quickly disappeared behind the giant pine before reappearing. "Nobody here," he yelled out as the blood ran cold in my veins. The branch the man had grabbed above him, as he peered out to look at me, was 12 feet off the ground. I told this to my dad, pleading with him to take me home, and we did leave, only because of the weather. He tried to convince me of black bears walking on 2 legs, but my time at the library told me what I'd seen. That was the first time I ever encountered what everyone calls Bigfoot. Horror in the Night, from ESS Turning. I don't scare easy. When you work the night shift as a security guard in a factory outside of Bogota, you get used to creepy noises and things that go bump when everyone else is sleeping. But that rain-soaked drive home through the Andes still haunts me years later. The overnight supervisor had asked me to stay late that Tuesday to help prep for an inspection. By the time I clocked out, a thunderstorm was brewing over the mountains, making the winding forest road home look even darker than usual. I pulled my jacket on tight and headed to the parking lot as the first fat raindrops splattered around me. My rattletrap truck roared to life, and I squinted through sheets of rainfall now pelting the windshield. Even with wipers on full blast, visibility was terrible between the storm and lack of guardrails on the narrow mountain passes, but going back to crash in the break room for the night was not an option either. Still 40 minutes from home in my tiny village, I white-knuckled the steering wheel and leaned forward, straining to make out the cliffside road through the downpour. Lightning suddenly forked through the clouds, illuminating the forest for miles with electric white light. Blinking to clear the purple blotches from my vision, something shifting in the trees nearby caught my eye in that split-second flash. The flashes of lightning carved shadows along every dripping branch and frond, so making out distinct shapes was impossible. Still, a nagging unease crept up my shoulders. That lurching movement off the road seemed way too big to be a deer or a stray cow. I was wondering about what I might have imagined seeing when the next ear-splitting crack and flash came. This time, there was no denying the silhouetted mass slowly crawling between wide tree trunks ahead, deep in the forest. I could make out spindly jointed legs, rippling slowly forward, braced against the huge dark sphere of its body, suspended off the rain-slicked earth by a good 10 to 15 feet. I slammed the brakes instinctively before my brain could even process that the thing emerging from the lightning-cast shadows had to be the size of a delivery truck, if not bigger. Maybe more like the huge tractor trailers that hauled produce through our little village into the capital. This creature, creeping between 2,000-year-old trees in the night, used its numerous barbed legs alone to carry its freakish bulk quietly through the underbrush. The brakes screeched in protest. I shoved my idling truck into reverse then, right as brilliant veins of light again clawed through the churning clouds. Dread leapt into my throat as the momentary flash spotlighted the swollen abdomen I'd glimpsed before, now yards closer to the forest's edge. 8 hideous eyes ringed the hairy mass, which had tipped forward as if tasting the storm-charged air. Impossibly long, pointed limbs shifted slowly, getting closer with a trampling grace no truck-sized being should possess. I was panicking then. I craned my neck to peer desperately behind me as the most recent break of lightning faded and darkness returned. I'd realized then I had turned off the headlights, and I didn't dare turn them back on, because if I did, I would fully expose that thing in the woods. I slammed it back into drive, and I roared almost blind down the twisting pass, praying as I never had before to arrive home intact. I only turned on the headlights when I knew I was safe. By then, I was gulping down huge breaths again. Back home, I was fumbling my keys, shaking so hard, trying to unlock my door. When I saw my wife, I couldn't force out more than a horrified whisper. I had no idea how to even start describing what I saw. But I did my best after calming down, and luckily she believed me. We moved to the city not long after, and I refused any job which would require me to drive along that road again. Every now and then, on stormy nights, my mind still traces patterns of a shriveling shadow sliding stealthily between ancient tree trunks on 8 crooked legs, braced to charge. The Bunny Beneath Colchester Overpass, from Jason R. I don't know how anyone can truly retire. For myself, retirement only lasted a few weeks. My home got a fresh coat of paint. I scrubbed the outside of it completely clean. I manicured the yard. My God, I was losing my mind. Rather than listen to me whine, my wife told me to find something to do with my time, or she would strangle me. Since retiring, I became a self-employed cryptid hunter. Obviously, it doesn't pay much, and the hours suck, but you get to spend endless hours on the road, only to see nothing. When you're trying to write a book about bizarre creatures, it helps to actually be able to find said creatures. But let's be honest, how many cryptids have actually been found? Whenever my wife and I would go anywhere, we'd bring along video equipment and go on little cryptid hunts. By and large, they were exactly what one would expect. You'd go out, find nothing, or find the terrifying stomping grounds of these elusive creatures to be patches of boring forest, muddy ponds, and little else. The closest we've come to finding some mysterious creature is getting a rotten log tossed at us down in the Everglades. So, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to go after something a bit more substantial. A phantom. The spirit of a madman who has haunted the Virginia countryside for over a century. The Bunny Man. I thought it was a joke. I mean, who in their right mind would fear the Bunny Man? I do, now. Whenever we go out on our little voyages, I do a deep dive on all the lore of whichever entity we're hunting. In terms of the Bunny Man, there's a ton of records and information. Most of it is confusing, and in more than a few cases, it's contradictory. I'm going to try to separate the different origins and backgrounds as best I can. There are different aspects of these variations that pop in and out of new sightings and reports. Long story short, it's a muddled, historical mess. If you look up the Bunny Man on Wikipedia, you'll be told that his story began in 1970. Well, so much for Wikipedia. The first reports of a Bunny Man stretch all the way back to the early 1900s. That's right, his story is over 120 years old. To most people of Fairfax County, Virginia, the Bunny Man is less a cryptid and more an urban legend. As I would later find out, it's much more than just a folktale. The first report of this creature or person is as ridiculous as the name suggests. Either a person or people claim to have seen a giant, vaguely man-shaped bunny rabbit, or a man in a rabbit costume. Things become a lot less funny when you discover that this entity was spotted holding a large knife. The foundation of the Bunny Man legend starts with the most classic of classic horror tropes, an escaped mental patient. You see, once upon a time, an insane asylum existed in Clifton, Virginia. The area's population had boomed after the close of the Civil War. As you can imagine, these people didn't want to raise their kids next to what they perceived was a threat. Residents started a petition asking for the inmates to be moved to Lorton Prison. As so often is the case in these legends, one of the vehicles transporting the inmates wrecked. 10 inmates were able to escape. After an exhaustive search, all but 2 of the men were found and captured. That left Marcus Walster and Douglas Griffin. In a rather depressing indictment of law enforcement of the area, after a while, the search for these men was called off. But then one day, Walster was found. Or at least, his body was. It was discovered hanging from the Colchester overpass. As is the case with most myths and legends, there are parts which just don't pass the smell test. In this case, it was what was found near his body that raises some red flags. According to legend, a footprint was found near his corpse. Inside the footprint was a message. "You will never find me, and you know it too." Signed, the Bunny Man. The more I looked into it, the more disturbing things got. In 1905, some teens decided to pay a visit to Colchester Overpass. It was a horrifically bad idea. Since the discovery of Walster's body, it had been nicknamed Bunny Man's Bridge. I say horrifically because according to the legend, the kids' mutilated bodies were found hanging from that bridge, just as Marcus Walster's had, half a decade earlier. The overpass became a local boogeyman. Parents forbade their kids from going anywhere near the place. Who could blame them? Anytime a kid got out of line, their parents would warn them that the Bunny Man was coming for them, so they'd better behave or they'd find their body hanging from the bridge. Now, let me stop right there and say that is one of the most jacked up things I saw while doing my research. Whichever parent said that to their kid needs to receive regular visits from Child Protective Services. Fast forward a few decades. In 1970, a report came out about a lunatic running around in a bunny costume wielding a hatchet. Needless to say, he was not out chopping wood. But in this chapter of the Bunny Man saga, things veered more toward the plausible. On a cold night in October of 1970, U.S. Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée were traveling along Guinea Road in the small town of Burke. They parked and got ready to visit Bennett's uncle. Something outside their car moved, catching their eyes. Before they could react, the front passenger window was smashed in. Terrified, they looked out the gaping hole and saw a man standing outside. He began to scream at them about how they were trespassing on private property and that he had their license number. Looking down, they found the hatchet that the madman had lobbed at them lying on the floor of the car. When you look into these accounts, it's critical to just report the facts. And the fact is, the two witnesses didn't agree as to what they saw. Bennett said he had seen a man in a bunny suit. His fiancée said the man was dressed in a white robe and tall pointed hat. Make of that what you will. Maybe it's just me, but the strangest thing about this story was what the police did with the hatchet after they completed their investigation. They gave it back to Bennett. 10 days later, on October 29th, the bunny man struck again. A security guard named Paul Phillips saw someone standing on the porch of a home undergoing construction. The house was located in Kings Park West on Guinea Road, the same road that Bennett and his fiancée had parked on just a week and a half earlier. Phillips' description is similar to the Air Force cadets in several ways. He claimed to see a man dressed in a bunny suit, although he said the costume was black, gray, and white, not just white. Another commonality between the two reports is the theme that Bunny Man didn't appreciate people wandering into his territory, with shouts of, "You are trespassing," and "If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." To prove he meant business, Bunny Man began chopping at the porch with an axe. Phillips provided a more detailed description of this loon. The guard said he was about 20 years old, a little over 5.5 feet tall, weighing about 175 pounds. How he could gauge the weight of a man dressed in a bunny suit is both impressive and dubious. Try as I might, I couldn't find anything that suggested Phillips had heard about Bennett's encounter. If he had been aware, it would have explained what happened next. In the weeks after Bennett and Phillips' alleged encounters, the police received more than 50 reports from citizens claiming they too had encountered a madman dressed as a giant bunny rabbit. I'm sure you can imagine that when a sensational story comes out about a monster, UFO, or whatnot, everyone and their brother claims they too had a similar experience. As for me, at the time, I was having a hard time buying into this cryptid. Apparently, the Fairfax County Police had felt the same way. With little to no evidence, they closed both cases without making an arrest. One notable newspaper, at least it was back then, published an article claiming that Bunny Man had eaten somebody's cat. As I drove my way toward the center of the Bunny Man legend, I tried to wrap my head around over a century's worth of reports. One thing I could say with certainty was that the Bunny Man defies classification. Each generation has added its own layer to the myth, or mangled what has come before. When you do what I do, you live a life reading between the lines. You hunt down articles hoping to find a few words that would help you pinpoint a specific location, or maybe an address, something about the description, anything. Allow me to say from experience, more than a few cryptid hunters out there are fueled more by emotion and passion, rather than a dedication to the facts and science. After trolling through some of the sites with information about the Bunny Man, I wanted to cry. Some are plagiarism personified. Others not only contradicted other sources, but themselves as well. As the years passed, the legends devolved. Claims began circulating that on midnight on Halloween, you could see a flash of light at the bridge. Now, the legend of the Bunny Man has escaped its Virginia confines and has spread across the nation. There's a series of Bunny Man movies, and you can even get a Bunny Man t-shirt or get hammered on Bunny Man beer. Is it any wonder that most people don't take reports like these seriously? Anyway, there's one thing that appears in almost all tellings of the Bunny Man story: Colchester Overpass. Packing my Hyundai Elantra with food and sodas, and donning my warmest coat, I headed to Virginia in search of a monster. For this particular excursion, I was going it alone. The wife had put her foot down when I suggested we go hunting for a homicidal maniac dressed in a rabbit costume. I nearly got knocked out by a skunk ape. I don't want my tombstone to read, "Here lies Alice, killed by a moron dressed like Bugs Bunny." With a kiss and a shake of her head, she wished me the best of luck as I started out on my voyage. During my research, I discovered that it's all but illegal to stake the bridge out on Halloween. Local law enforcement has been known to go as far as to block off the bridge during the spooky holiday. Just to be safe, I decided not to visit the disturbing landmark on Halloween. I didn't want to get arrested for trespassing, but I also knew treading on his domain was the one thing I could do that would draw the bunny man's attention. I didn't think there was much chance I'd see much of anything. The main reason I went was to do some research and to be able to say that I'd actually been there. After checking in at my hotel, I spent the day traveling around the local area. It's less than 6 miles between Bunnyman Bridge and Kings Park West. It didn't take me long to get a general lay of the land. I stopped at stores and drove up and down the streets. Everywhere I went, things felt off. The people, the buildings, everything seemed to be under the influence of something. I scolded myself. Dude, stop. You just got here. The bridge itself is about as boring as one would imagine, well, during the day. When it got dark, everything changed. The faded whites and muted grays became deeper, darker. I don't know how to describe it, but deeper fits the best. It felt like the whole area sank into itself, falling into the dark. Everything in the surrounding area just started steeping into the growing blackness as the sun dipped below the horizon. In a lot of the stories you hear on this channel, there are always statements that things just got quiet, or the sounds of animals in the wind disappeared. That's sort of what happened on my first night there, but not really. The environment made me feel like sounds of joy never existed at all. The whole area around the bridge felt as if it was detached from the rest of the world. It was almost like I couldn't hear, or that I was underwater, or something else. And then I got cold, bone-achingly cold. I felt like I was suffering from hypothermia, despite being completely warm and dry. I'm not easily unnerved. Most of the places I visit don't so much as elicit a yawn. But it felt like this bridge was swallowing the world around me. There were no flashes of light on the night I was there. If anything, things just seemed to get darker and harder. When I say harder, I mean difficult to move. It's like when you try to run when you're dreaming, and no matter how hard you try, you can't exceed a slow crawl. That's when I heard them, the voices. There were definitely voices in the dark. At first, they seemed to be coming from a great distance away, so distant that I couldn't quite make them out. As they grew nearer, I was able to pick out words amongst all the gibberish. Not here, and you can't find me, were the ones that I heard the clearest. Something was out there, but it didn't appear focused or coherent. I think Colchester Overpass is a wrinkle of unresolved horrors and tragedies that pull pain in towards itself. It might have always been that way, and the Bunnyman stories just gave the dark energy a form. Or maybe the entity is just a touchstone that the locals internalized as a symbol of the dark presence that lurks there. I didn't consider any of this at the time. The closer the voices became, the more my rational mind screamed at me to run. I got back in my car and drove to the hotel as fast as I could. I prayed that whatever lurked out there hadn't followed me. To my horror, it did. On the way back, I encountered several people who seemed out of place, given how late it was. Entering the hotel lobby, I nearly bumped into a worn-looking man in his mid-30s. He seemed to come alive as soon as he caught sight of me. "Did you have fun out there tonight?" That was the final straw. I packed my bags and left that night. On the way back, I had lots of time to think. I started to develop a theory. What if, all those years ago, something happened there? What if the fabric of the region had become unsettled somehow? When I'd been there, it had felt like I was walking through Stephen King's It. It was as if some force had taken over the area, smothering it in its dark embrace. Poetic license aside, there was something about the region that made me glad to head home. On the way back, I found myself wondering, did the Bunnyman murders create a paranormal scar that impacts the area to this very day? Is that why the entity has appeared in so many different incarnations throughout the decades? I don't think the Bunnyman is a cryptid, or even an urban legend. I think it's an influence. Something there causes bad things to happen. It brings out the worst in people, and I'm very happy to declare that I will never be going back there again. In fact, after my experiences at Bunnyman Bridge, I'm not sure I'll be doing any more field research for my book. The Haunted Hotel. From Claire Anonymous. I used to be a travel writer several years ago, flying to different cities, checking out cool spots, eating at the finest establishments as the staff tried to impress me so that I'd have to write a great article about them. That could be the definition of a dream job for any young person. The salary was meager, but at least I got these cool experiences on somebody else's dime, right? That thought used to tide me over those dead, broke end of the months as I struggled to pay the high rent of my city. Until my trip to a particular Asian city. I won't say which it was. My normie article about it is still out there, and a clever listener could probably deduce which one it was. Hey, want to go to a haunted hotel? It was my editor who pitched the story to me. A 5-star hotel with rumors of a dark past, and a bunch of negative reviews that threatened to besmirch its good name. The hotel had just gone through an expensive renovation, and was eager to shed its old reputation, so it was sending out press kits and trips left, right, and center in its marketing bid to attract clientele. My editor knew I was a major skeptic in a city full of superstition and ghost stories. He thought it would be funny if something did happen to me, and I'd have to eat crow, accepting that the supernatural might be real. A haunted hotel was low on my list of thrills, but I thought, what the heck? That's 2 nights of free food and alcohol. I arrived in style. A sleek black limousine had picked me up from the airport, and the hotel's marketing person was at the entrance, ready to take me on a tour of the place. I noticed some strange configurations of the building right away, said to allow for better feng shui, the Chinese art of geomancy. I wish I could describe it more, but trust me, the placements and shapes of certain furniture and fixtures would make you go, wow, they really do like this shape. There were also some amulets and talismans here and there, just tastefully added to the decor, without being too obviously set in place. You wouldn't have noticed them if you were not specifically looking for them. The hotel also had some odd choices for artwork in the lobby. I'm not going to elaborate, this is a big giveaway. All these were noted in hotel reviews to be ways that the management have tried to keep the ghosts at bay. With this renovation at least, these spiritual additions were less garish than before and blended nicely with the modern decor. The hotel staff took me all over the hotel compound before ending off with a sumptuous dinner at one of the restaurants. Then I was finally left alone in my suite. There was a separate living study room with a small toilet and a sliding door that led to the bedroom and ensuite bathroom. The first thing I noticed was a group of tiny little Buddhist monks decorating one of the glass shelves. Each had a different pose, one covering his eyes, the next his ears, another his mouth, and the fourth one was just sitting still and smiling. I've never seen a grouping of 4 before. Understandably so, because 4 is a highly unlucky number in Chinese culture. After my shower, I called my then boyfriend to wish him good night before trying to go to sleep. I was exhausted from the travel and the non-stop socializing, but for some reason, adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I'd shut off all the lights and slid the bedroom door shut. The floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a magnificent view of the city skyline were covered over with some heavy blackout curtains, so light was not a problem. I shut my eyes again, but without wanting to do so, my ears were straining to hear something other than the pounding of my heart. Silence engulfed the room, and faintly, I could hear the slow dripping of the tap. I got up to shut it off, puzzled, because I'm normally a fastidious person when it comes to water conservation. But just as I started to walk back into the bedroom, I stopped. Something was out of place. A sliver of light made its way across the floor. The sliding door had opened just an inch, revealing a little that the living room was flooded with light. But how could that be? I'd switched off all the lights before retreating to the bedroom. I froze by the bathroom door, now nervous to take a step further. Did someone enter my suite? I waited for a few moments before yanking the sliding door to the side, and nothing. No one was there. Just all the lights were switched on. Even the shelving lights were on. All my stuff from the day was where I left it. My laptop was on the coffee table, my handbag and a book on the sofa. There was a container of nuts strewn across the round dining table. That I hadn't touched. They were part of the welcome gifts of snacks and a bottle of red wine from the hotel. I was absolutely sure I had not even taken the container from its place near the entryway. I strode to the toilet by the entrance. Empty, of course. No one was hiding in any place that could fit a human. The security door latch was still on. Not even the staff could breach that if they had another key card to the room. Spooked, I left the lights as they were, then went back to the bedroom, making sure the sliding door was properly shut. I switched on the lights and tried to sleep as best I could. Throughout the night, I heard things moving about in the living room, deliberate movements, though they were done quietly. Sometimes soft footsteps on the parquet, though none of them came right up to the bedroom door. I couldn't parse what was going on. I was going mad, trying to rationalize those sounds. And when everything finally stopped, I realized it was dawn, and I hadn't slept at all. That day was a long one, starting early with another tour, this time of the city. The meals, the socializing, the need to have my game face on, all went by in a blur until night fell and I had some time to myself. I picked up local snacks for supper, which I took back to my room. There was to be a massive brunch the next day before my flight, so I'd wanted to pack my stuff and get my things in order instead of doing it at the last minute. I was saddled with a great deal of souvenirs, gifts from the hotel, and press literature from the hotel, along with the random things I managed to accumulate during the short trip. I was nervous about going through another sleepless night, so I spoke out loud. "Leave me alone. Let me sleep. I'm leaving tomorrow." I felt stupid doing that, but I thought it wouldn't hurt. Showing fear can make you a target with predators, so maybe if I was assertive with whatever the heck was in that room with me, it could work. Of course, nothing replied. I continued with the rest of my winding down routine. Then I retired to bed. This time, I left all the lights on. I had my eyes shut, drifting away in that half-dreaming, half-awake state, when I was suddenly jolted back to reality. Something was standing right at my bedside. I felt it. I didn't see it. And before I could even fully register what was going on, I felt its face coming near to my ear, and it blew a quick, cold breath. Anger flooded me. I'd had enough. My eyes flew open and I shot up from the bed. Nothing, of course, was there. But I was enraged now. I tore the room apart, trying to look for a clue, then stomped off to do the same to the living room. The only thing out of place were the snacks. My half-eaten supper was now strewn across the table and the floor underneath it. Crisps were smashed and scattered about. The sauces for the fried chicken were smeared on the floor. I was aghast. Nothing made sense. I cleaned things up as best I could and turned the TV and laptop on. I guess I would just sleep on the flight home. At the brunch the next day, I carefully tried to broach the subject of ghosts with the hotel's PR person. A slight unease crept across her face before a professional smile took over and she chirped out the carefully rehearsed, "Those are just rumors. By the way, they didn't get it right. This compound was not used as a blank during the war." Another wide smile, and she smoothly changed the subject. The next few days back home were uneventful, until a pressing deadline had me deciding to spend the night at my office. It wasn't an unusual thing. I frequently did that since it was so much easier to write in the silence with no one around. Once everyone left, I locked up the main door, making sure the security system was set properly, then settled at my desk. I was fully focused on my work for a few hours until a strange rustling broke me out of my concentration. I looked around. The room was suddenly extremely cold. The air conditioning unit must have been acting up again, knocking some papers onto the floor, I thought. I got back to my work and tried to pick up where I'd left off, until a very loud tapping of the keyboard keys behind me. I stood up so fast, I knocked my swivel chair against the wall, and the force rebounded the chair straight at me, causing me to fall. That was it. Something in my gut told me to get out. I hurriedly packed up my things and called for an Uber. I don't know if the incident was connected to my hotel stay, but since nothing of that sort had ever happened to me in the countless nights I spent at the office, I'm inclined to think that they are connected. I left that job. I left that industry, maybe just a year later. As far as I can tell, judging from the latest reviews, the hotel is still trying to reform its image by press trips and influencer trips. Some claim nothing happened to them in their stay. Others describe creepy occurrences in the elevators, and sometimes, like me, in the rooms. There are several theories online as to the source of these hauntings, but they contradict each other, and typing them out will make the hotel too identifiable. I've looked up the history of the hotel, and the PR person was at least right about the wartime use of the location. So what could be causing these disturbances? I don't know. Years after, I'm now far more receptive to the idea of the supernatural. But really, it's just left me with more questions than answers. How could something incorporeal have that much energy to do messes like that, and make that much noise? Back in my day. From Chris. I was a security officer for a rather nice office building in the 1980s. I was mostly in charge of the night shift. And one night, I was alone in the building, and everyone had left for the evening. Most nights, I would read books in the office, watching the CCTV for a few hours, before getting up and doing rounds. I tried to do rounds every 2 to 3 hours, and always had to jot down if anything happened once I got back to the office. That evening was pretty average. I was 2 hours into my shift, and had a bowl of chili in my hands, nibbling away while focused on the monitors. At the moment, I didn't notice anything abnormal, so I turned away, placing the chili down and checking my pager. I had no messages, no 911s from family or coworkers, so I flipped through one of the magazines I found in the office. It was a rather nice one with new motorcycles and hot rods, really just something to daydream about. I set down the book as my alarm chirped, and I drew my attention to my screens. I noticed small flickers in the lower right screen, and I got up, slightly alarmed, not knowing if it was a flashlight or just glitches in the system. This was a newer system, so pretty unlikely, but I wrote down the time and which monitor, and I got up to investigate anyway, thinking maybe it was an office worker who had forgotten something, which would have been odd because I was sure I'd locked everything down already. I walked out of the office, my pager on my hip, and my hand firmly wrapped around the rather heavy flashlight they gave us. It was heavy enough to swing, if needed, and provided wonderful light. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, checking each and every corner of the floor. Naturally, I found nothing, so I figured it was a glitch, but I couldn't explain the light flickering in the bottom right of the screen. I continued to the 4th floor, where I swore I heard water running, so I made my way there, announcing myself to whoever might be there. I stood in the well-lit restroom. There was no one there, but the water was running and the lights flickered. I figured the water had been left running by someone and that the electricity was having issues, since it was pretty stormy outside. So I shut off the water, turning the lights back off. I began to head back to my office when I heard a slam. I shoved the door to my office open. I saw smoke coming from the same monitor I'd seen that glitch come from. I yanked the cords out from the monitors, calling my boss on his landline. He wasn't answering, so I left a message and wrote a report. The thing is, those were brand new monitors. I had no idea what fried the one that had flickered. I plugged the other ones back in and immediately shut them back down. I'd seen in the snowy CCTV a figure of a shadow. If it was one glitchy screen, that would have been fine, and I would have gone to investigate. But it was the same shadow on each and every screen. I locked the building down, again, for the evening, and I went home. I didn't return for any of my other shifts, but I would learn later that the building had an electrical fire and burned nearly to the ground. Were the things I saw that night an omen, a warning? Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.